Hey, good afternoon or good evening, everyone, or good morning, whenever you're watching this. So the live video is going out on Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra, verse 32. And just to let you know, I've been traveling and teaching intensively the last few days. So I'm a bit exhausted, but I've been promising you guys this video, and let's just do it. Fortunately, I know this verse well and have practiced it a fair amount, so hopefully it's totally fine. Verse 32, and here we do see a shift in the text. We're on a whole new topic, and it doesn't really seem to correspond with what went before. So here's the Sanskrit of the verse, so you can follow along. And I choose to translate this one very simple and literally, so we can just unpack the literal translation. So we've got the Sanskrit and the translation, so we can recite it. śikhi-pakṣaiś citra-rūpair maṇḍalaiḥ śūnya-pañcakam dhyāyato nuttare śūnye praveśo hṛdaye bhavet. Okay, so that means meditating on the 5 spaces as the colorful circles of the peacock's feathers, one enters the heart, the supreme space. Like I said, that's a very literal translation, and part of the reason I wanted to go with a super literal, super bare bones translation is just to demonstrate the problems with the existing translations. The main one being that none of them seem to translate the grammar very strictly in terms of the apposition here, which is counterintuitive, but then makes sense on the level of practice. And I refer to the word as in the English translation. Meditating on the 5 spaces as the colorful circles of the peacock's feathers. So this is really key to understanding the verse, and this is the literal grammar that we have in the Sanskrit. So what are we being asked to do here? Well, before we get into the details, let's just do the word-by-word breakdown. Dhyāyato, meditating on direct object, śūnya-pañcakam, the set of 5 voids or 5 spaces. Maṇḍalaiḥ, as circles. What kind of circles? Citra-rūpair, colorful circles. That is to say, the colorful circles that are śikhi-pakṣaiś, that are the peacock's feathers. So śikhi is a peacock and pakṣa is feathers. So meditating on the 5 spaces as the colorful circles of the peacock's feathers, one praveśo enters into nuttare śūnye, the supreme space, that is to say, hṛdaye, the heart. Here not meaning the heart cakra, but the heart as the core of being, the heart as the sara or essence, the ultimate madhya, the heart bindu it's sometimes called, so the absolute core of being. Okay, so what's the actual practice? Well, it's a bit mysterious, and we can get some clues from the commentator, but he's doesn't seem entirely sure what's going on. Now, the first thing, what he does acknowledge, of course, is that the 5 spaces are the 5 senses. Now, it's not immediately intuitive, even if you know the tradition, because the 5 spaces could also be the 5 main chakras of the 5 chakra system found in Kaula Trika works. Now, you might remember that from earlier verses, we had a 12 chakra system, but there's also a 5 chakra system in Kaulatrika works. And these 5 chakras are sometimes called 5 voids or spaces. So it could be referring to that, but much more likely we have the 5 senses here. So meditate on the 5 senses as the colorful circles of the peacock's feather. Well, if you look at a peacock's feather, what most immediately strikes you about the peacock's feather? Well, what you most immediately notice is that it's the beautiful circles on the feather are concentrically nested. So this is our main clue to the practice, because we are to meditate on the 5 voids or the 5 senses as the colorful circles of the peacock's feather. In other words, in this way, concentrically nested. And what do we find in the very center of the peacock's feather? Well, it looks like the absolute void. It's this very, 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 very dark black with a hint of blue, with a hint of cobalt blue color. So that is the ultimate sort of goal of the practice, is to enter the innermost heart. So we start from the outside and we move inward with the 5 senses. Okay, so what's the practice here? The practice is essentially a kind of laya yoga, where you start with really totally tuning into one sense and then offering it or merging it into the subsequent sense. Okay, so the traditional order, and you don't necessarily need to follow this order, but in the traditional order, we would begin with the sense of smell. So maybe you light a little incense or something, and you immerse yourself in the sense of smell completely. And then after a little while, you offer the sense of smell into the sense of taste, dissolving it into the sense of taste. So you could perhaps do this also by smelling something delicious and then eating something delicious. So the sense of smell gets offered and merged into the sense of taste. And then the next step, not being particularly intuitive for most people, the sense of taste gets offered or merged into the sense of sight. So it's not just shifting attention, that would be too easy, as it were. It's not just shifting attention from one sense to the next, but actually merging the senses successively, so they're collapsing in. So actually smell and taste both merge into sight, into the sense of sight, and you become immersed in sight completely. And then all of those senses get offered into and merged into the sense of touch. So this is, I think it's something very, very, very hard to describe in words, and that this offering process where awareness gets more and more subtle. Now, if this sequence doesn't work for you, right, because this sequence makes more sense in the traditional cultural model of how the senses are organized in this pre-modern period. But for example, we're much more highly stimulated visually than people were 1,000 years ago. We're constantly bombarded with visual stimuli, so it occupies a different place relative to the other senses for us. So you could change up the order, I think. I think that would be not invalidating the practice at all. But just to give the traditional order, right? So sight gets then dissolved into touch, the sensation of touch, the whole field of touch, becoming immersed in touch. All the other senses are now dissolved in touch, except for sound, because we haven't got there yet. And then the sense of touch is dissolved into and offered into the sense of hearing, the sense of sound. So then from sound And by the way, this is important when we're listening to all the sounds in the environment, becoming immersed in the sense of sound, you're also listening to the silence. You're listening to the silence pervading all the sounds, the silence within which all sounds take place. And so from there, it's relatively easy to slip into this, what some people would call a Samadhi state, this state of profound inner stillness and silence, where all the senses now have merged into this inner state of silence and stillness. So that doesn't mean that you, it doesn't mean that your senses turn off necessarily, that you don't hear or perceive anything, but rather if there are external stimuli, that they seem to sort of retreat to far away, and they're barely noticeable, or they're not registering, they're not grabbing the mind, even though they're there and they're perceptible. So again, it doesn't matter whether or not it's you actually have any sense stimuli. It's this sense of being absorbed in the state of profound stillness and silence that feels like the center of your being, or the ground of your being, if you will. Okay, so now what we do have for sure is a lack of total certainty about what the verse is talking about, because as I've mentioned in other videos, our main commentator, Shivopadhyaya, is writing many centuries after, almost 1,000 years after, the original source text. So we're not sure that he knows what's going on, even when he thinks he knows what's going on. And sometimes it's clear that he isn't sure what's going on, but even when he thinks he's sure, we can't be sure that he's right. So just to open it up to interpretations, what else could these five voids be? So we've already mentioned the five senses, but whatever they are, whichever voids these five voids are, these five spaces, it's still the same process of nesting one into the next. And by the way, how are the five senses five spaces? Well, because they are apertures, or we experience sensory information through apertures in the body, right? Where the eyes are taken as one aperture because they sum their visual data. You don't see two fields of vision, you see one. And the nose is taken as one aperture because also, again, it's both nostrils are smelling the same thing. The ears are taken as two different apertures because indeed they hear slightly differently. And the mouth is one. So, and that gives us our five spaces, as it were, five apertures corresponding to five senses. Okay, what else could the five spaces be? I already said the five chakras of the standard five chakra system of the Kaulatrika lineage. What are those five? Pelvic floor, the khanda halfway between the genitals and the navel, in the lower abdomen. That's the location of the second chakra in this five chakra system. Then the heart, then the third eye. Well, in some sources we get the palate, in some sources we get the third eye for the fourth chakra, but one or the other. And then the crown of the head as the fifth chakra. So again, these chakras are sometimes referred to as spaces or voids, presumably because you meditate on them in some practices as open spaces or spheres of pure space. So these five chakras, by the way, are discussed in Tantra Illuminated in the practice section of the book. Okay, so that's another possibility, in which case, what are you doing? You would be nesting upwards. So you would be then, as it were, drawing the chakra in the pelvic floor up to merge into the low belly chakra, and then drawing that up to merge into the heart chakra, and then drawing that up to merge into the palate or third eye chakra, and then drawing that up to merge in the crown of the head chakra, until you enter into, from that space spacious openness into the feeling of total centeredness or repose in the ground of your being. So whatever the 5 are, you're going to end up in the same place. Then one other possibility for 5, now this is a more remote possibility because these aren't really 5 spaces, but another 5-fold possibility, of course, is the 5-layered self, where it's physical body, mental, emotional body, and then prana, the prana vayus, the pranic body, if you will, and then the void, the in this case, not the void of the supreme heart, but rather the sensationless void, and then the supreme heart of pure consciousness, which is simultaneously transcendent and immanent, that nuttare śūnya, that hṛdaya. So that's another way to do the practice. Anyway, it's a fruitful practice. I really enjoy that one, of tuning into the physical body and then merging the feeling of the physical body as it gets, the feeling of the physical body gets more and more subtle and merges into the mental emotional body, the puriyashtaka, also known as the subtle body. And then the mental emotional body merges into the pranic body. And then the pranic body merges into the sensationless void. And then from there into the heart, the ultimate heart, the supreme space. What's the difference between these last two? Simple. In the sensationless void, it is exclusive, and it's an exclusive experience. It's sensationless, silent stillness that excludes sensory experience, at least temporarily, often for a very short time. And then this supreme heart, supreme space of the heart, is that where, as I was talking about, you experience this profound stillness and silence, even though activity might be present. So it's the simultaneously transcendent and immanent consciousness. Okay, so now again, what I try to do that's different from other translators, especially older translators, is admit that there's an ambiguity here that we can't necessarily solve. We can speculate about, we can't be sure what the original author intended, but this is empowering to you, because then you get to experiment and see, which of these methods of merging one into the next is most fruitful in your practice, because there is this room for flexibility and experiment, especially with a very interesting verse like this, which is mysterious and clearly powerful. I find these practices to be powerful anyway, but yet there's this ambiguity about what's exactly going on. Okay, so let's see what your questions are, and then we can actually maybe do a version of the practice. Yeah, so a couple of these questions have already been answered. So Gerald asks, if the fruit is the supreme space of the heart, is the heart an aperture as well? No, not here. Here we have 5 spaces, or 5 spaces, and then the nuttare śūnya, the supreme space, which is not, strictly speaking, an aperture. So moving through successively these 5 nested spaces leads us to this supreme space, which is beyond the level of needing an aperture, I guess. I never actually thought about that question. Okay. So Maria asks, so are we merging the senses, the chakras, and the 5 layers? Well, what I was saying is that it's one or the other, that the original intention of the verse is one or the other of these options. The most likely probably being the senses, the sense spheres, if you will, the sense fields, one merging into the next, merging into the next. And so what I recommend, and what seems to be most fruitful for people, is that you put the senses in the order that makes the most sense to you, because it's really about successful laya yoga, being able to dissolve one thing into the next, into the next, into the next. And so if it works better one way than the other, then by definition, you want to do it that way, because we're talking about actualizing laya yoga, not just following a pro forma, a list given to you by tradition. So Brian asks, is there any possibility that it refers to each of the 5 elements merging into the others? I thought about that, but I've never seen the 5 elements called voids or spaces. But if it was, if we were working in that way, then it would be earth merging into water, into fire, into wind, into space, into supreme space of the heart. But I just think we would have to have some example of the elements being called spaces, which I haven't seen, and maybe someone else has. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a version of the practice. And this is just a rehearsal. For your home practice, I do invite you to do an image search and look at a peacock's feather, and look at these beautiful concentric circles. Often 5 or 6 are clearly visible. And so again, in the innermost one, you've got a black with this tinge. Usually, I mean, there's variation with peacocks, but a black with this tinge of cobalt blue. And indeed, that is one way that the essence bindu is pictured, as this like very, very deep, dark, and yet iridescent blue, or blue-black. And that's also, mythologically, the color of Shiva's skin is blue-black, as well as Krishna's, actually. So maybe there's possibly some real significance to that in terms of the inspiration for this verse. Let's see. See if I'm missing anything from my notes. Yeah, I also thought about whether the different relative sizes of the circles on the peacock's feather was significant, that the biggest or most or thickest circle would correspond to the mental emotional body, which indeed is our strongest locus of identification. Maybe the author thought about it in that kind of level of precise analogical detail. I don't know, but that's another interesting thing to think about. And I'll just paste in my notes from my translation document. A lot of you have the translation document, and these notes are of course not final, but just for the people who don't have it, we'll paste those notes in for you to look at later. Okay, and having said that, of course, the 5 senses do correspond to the 5 great elements, like sound resonates in space, and so on. Okay, well, let's just do a version of the practice. And in this case, just because I think it's more effective for most people, let's try doing it in a different order from the traditional order of the senses, which again, I think makes sense in our society where we're much more visually stimulated. So we'll start with the visual sense. So, as always, let your body be relaxed, still, comfortable, but upright. And just breathe a little bit deeper and slower. And become aware of the whole sense field. So in other words, you're not looking at one thing like the screen, but you're actually softening your gaze. You're going into soft focus and you're looking at the whole sense field simultaneously. Can you be aware of the entire visual field all the way out to the periphery, equally and simultaneously? Being with the whole visual field. And after a minute of that, or however long you want, you can close your eyes and offer the visual field into the sense of taste, bringing your awareness to the tongue and the mouth. And maybe there's some remnant or taste of something you ate or drank earlier. And maybe there's not. It doesn't matter. Just tuning into that sense of taste. And after a minute of that, offering that taste sense into the sense of smell. For a lot of people, smell is subtler than taste. Even if you smell nothing, you're just tuning into the nose and the air in the nostrils. Make sure the jaw is relaxed, by the way. And then you offer the sense of smell into the sense of touch, bringing your awareness to the whole body, the entire surface of the skin, and the feeling of touch. So the clothes on your body, the temperature of the air on your face, and also inner touch, meaning the feeling of breathing. That is part of the sensation of touch. The movement of the diaphragm, the rise and fall of the belly and or chest. And after reposing in a full awareness of the sense of touch, you then offer it into, merge it into the sense of hearing. The whole sound field is predominant now. And all the other senses are still present, they're just merged with the sense of hearing. Almost as if it's sound that emanates anything else that you feel in a subtle way. And the sense of hearing is predominant, so it's like you're listening deeper than just with your ears, sort of listening to everything in the present moment. And listening to the silence as well. Silence within which all the sounds occur. The profound stillness underlying all activity. Until seemingly without effort, you just slip into silent, still, spacious presence of the kind that excludes nothing. Silent, still presence, so profound, nothing need be excluded, because nothing can disturb it. And if you can, you might even feel that profound, all-inclusive silence emanates from the very center of your being. Om. So once again, that was a kind of rehearsal. And in your home practice, you can take a little more time with it, just a little bit more time with each sense layer. And when it clicks, it really clicks, but it's important that you don't expect any practice to click the first time necessarily. But if this one clicks for you, it can go really, really, really deep. At least that's what I've found. So yeah, as Robin mentions in the comments, I think that whatever order you go in with the senses, it makes sense to at least keep the sound field as last. That seems like a very important traditional teaching that is functional, is effective, because when you listen to all the sounds simultaneously, then it's easy to listen to the silence as well, and then to go from there, from physical silence, the physical silence that's behind the sounds, to this kind of mystical silence in the supreme space of the heart. At least that's what I find. I couldn't imagine ending with a sense other than the sound field. Wonderful. Okay. See you next time for verse 33. And during the week, I can answer any questions, or try to answer any questions about this practice. And I invite you to experiment with it. This is your experimental laboratory. but you keep this principle of nesting one into the next, or offering one into the next, merging one into the next. What we're sure about, what I'm sure about, is however we do this practice, it is a practice of laya yoga, dissolving one into the next until you get to that supreme space at whatever level of access you have to it. Nice to be with you all. Om.